logistics related announcements to make so that we can create a smooth and pleasant experience for everyone. You might have noticed that all of your microphones have been muted. They will be muted through the session. Any questions to the speaker, please feel free to post them in the chat. They will be taken in the Q&A session. All participants except those who communicate by sign language are requested to keep their videos off. We have sign language interpreters to aid smooth participation. The active sign language interpreter has been spotlighted now, and we have 2 interpreters, so every half an hour there will be a switch of interpreters. There is also automated live captioning for this event, and in order to enable it, you should first click on the red live indicator. Screen reader users can click on the button that says Otter AI live streaming. And in the dropdown, click on view stream on Otter AI transcripts. The live transcript will actually open in a new browser window. So it will be helpful if you can resize both of your windows, that is the Zoom window and the browser window, so that you can have a pleasant viewing experience. You can contact any of us for logistical queries. You can post them in chat as well. I hope you have a pleasant webinar ahead. I can now hand over the mic to Professor Amit.
Thank you. Thank you for the instructions, Aishwarya. My name is Amit Prakash. I'm a faculty member at IIIT Bangalore, and I am associated with the newly set up Center for Accessibility in the Global South, CAGS, at the Institute. Welcome to this webinar. This is the first webinar that is being conducted by the center. The center is a research and outreach unit at IIIT Bangalore. It has been established in partnership with researchers and practitioners at Microsoft Research India and Vision Empower. It aims to be a center of excellence and scholarship, bringing together academia, industry, government, disabled people's organizations, and change makers in the area of accessibility to study and understand the various concerns related to persons with disabilities in the Global South and help in creating and disseminating effective solutions. The RQB Research, Rethink and Respond to Disability webinar series has its objective as renegotiating, extending, and opening up the academic space to alternative knowledge, ways of conducting research, and modes of expression beyond the traditional structures and forms. Through these webinars, we seek to enable diverse stakeholders to come together for discussions and debates on factors influencing the research on disability and technology. So thank you very much for joining us today on this very first webinar. Before we start the talk by Professor Ghai, may I request our director, Professor Sadgopan, to address all of us. Professor Sadgopan, please.
Thank you, Amit. I'm indeed delighted to be formally launching the center today. This has come after a year of painstaking effort by our colleague, Professor Amit Prakash. Special thanks to Dr. Swami Manohar of Microsoft Research for agreeing to be the co-director of this center. We are indeed delighted to have an eminent researcher, Dr. Aritha Ghai, giving the talk today. At IIITB, we have been witness to a number of seemingly unrelated, but looking back, providentially well-connected developments. 1, 20 years back, we had a teaching assistant in our labs to assist Professor Dinesha in programming assignments. Her hard work and determination helped her to find a job. Today, she is a senior person in Dell. 10 years back, we hired a physically challenged person as a staff member. She's a quiet worker. 5 years back, we had an unusual student who walked into my office seeking admission. She was physically challenged from birth. I wanted to help her, but I was not sure as to how my colleagues can teach her. She formally applied after a year as a project employee, got admission on her own merit, topped the batch when she graduated. She is funded by Microsoft, and today she's an entrepreneur. This year, one of our current batch of students became the national champion in blind tennis. There were many such developments that convinced us there is a need and we have something to contribute. With Dr. Swami Manohar endorsing it, the center is on, and that's why we are here. Thank you, Amit. Thank you, Dr. Swami, and over to Amit. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gopan. I'll just pass on the floor to Dr. Swami Manohar, who is the co-convener of this center. Dr. Manohar is a principal researcher at Microsoft Research India, and his primary research interest is in virtual and augmented reality technologies. He is currently focused on applying these technologies for empowering visually impaired persons. Dr. Swami Manohar has kindly agreed to moderate and chair the session. Over to you, Dr. Manohar.
Thanks very much, Amit. It's indeed a pleasure and an honor to be here. And I'm so happy to be part of the first lecture in the RQD series, and especially delighted to host Professor Anita Ghai as the first speaker. Nothing about us without us is the rallying slogan of all marginalized communities in general and people with disabilities in particular. This slogan, I believe, informs all of our efforts as we start to bring shape to this new center. And that's why it's, I think, eminently appropriate to have Professor Ghai launch this series of lectures today. Professor Ghai, I'll refer to as Anita. She's such a delight to meet and be, I'm again honored to be collaborating with her. Anita is a globally recognized scholar in disability studies in the Global South. Her books on the subject are deep and scholarly, while being very, very accessible to people like me trying to understand this new area of disability studies, especially with relevance to the Global South. What I really loved about her writing is her courage and honesty in talking about her personal disabilities, but always with academic rigor and objectivity, a powerful mix. And I look forward to her talk today. Formal introduction, Professor Anita Ghai joined as professor in the School of Human Studies, Ambedkar University, Delhi in 2015. Before this, Anita has been an associate professor in the Department of Psychology in Jesus and Mary College, University of Delhi. Her interest is in disability studies and issues of sexuality, care, psychology, and gender. As a former fellow at the Nehru Memorial Museum Library, Teen Murti Bhavan, Anita has researched on issues of care of disabled women recipients and providers of care with leanings towards feminist and disability theory. Anita has been the former president of the Indian Association of Women's Studies. She has authored 3 or 4 books. I've read 2 of them. Rethinking Disability in India, a Disembodied Form, Issues of Disabled Women, co-authored The Mentally Handicapped, Prediction of the Work Performance with Anima Sen, and also edited Disability in South Asia, Knowledge and Experience. She's also an editor of Disability and Society, Scandinavian Journal of Disability Research, and the Indian Journal of Disability Studies. Over to you, Anita, and it's such a delight to have you here. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. And I feel very, very honored to be a part of such a center where both research as well as academia and disabled people would be the stakeholders, and together they would kind of move on. I'm really thankful to Dr. Sadhugopan and Amitji and everyone. Let me just simply start by saying that people who really like technology, I am kind of a cyborg, because I have a motorized wheelchair, which actually makes me, very, very mobile. And of course, a lot of people who kind of envy me that this mobility sometimes is very problematic for many people. So let me begin with my talk, which is on disability studies and technology, as well as I end up with going into post-humanism and some questions that are raised by Rosa Braidotti specifically. So let me start. Disability-like questions of race, gender, caste, and class is one of the most stimulating topics among scholars who have interest in marginality. In my understanding, the comprehension and meaning of disability in India has been understood as embedded in multiple cultural discourses that are subtly nuanced. In today's presentation, I would like to focus on the significance of understanding disability as knowledge production, with the recognition that situated knowledge emerges from disability too. Experience too. The genesis of disability studies reflects not only the pain and anguish of disabled lives, but also the resistance to oppression inherent in living with a label, which evokes and attaches a negative value to lack, deficit, as well as difference. The normative culture, both in India and the world over, carries existential and aesthetic anxieties about difference of any kind, be it caste, class, gender, or disability. This leads to a creation of living reality of acute marginalization, discrimination, and stigmatization. Consequently, my research and practice have led to the evolution and legitimation of disability studies as a discipline. Before I underscore the potential of disability studies, let me foreground some of the challenges that I have led to the development of disability studies. As a disabled woman with a visible impairment and a cyborg, my own location in the field is complicated as my subject position is relevant to anyone researching disability. So the questions that emerge are as follows. For example, what is my stance as an activist or academician? With what authority can I speak about disability and disability studies? What is the politics of my epistemic privilege and why? Am I speaking with disabled people or about them? What language do I use to describe disability? Who has the power to name and label? How does understanding of disability studies exclude others from speaking out? How should I negotiate with the issues of diagnosis and certification? Perhaps the simplest way to think of emergence of the field is to identify disability studies as the academic side of disability rights movement and the UN Convention. The political theorist Michael Walzer has concisely characterized social criticism as the educated cousin of the common complaint to make his argument that effective social theory must never move far from the very real problems faced by people. So disability studies in an interdisciplinary field of study concerned with the representation of the concepts, culture, and personal experiences of disability in all its variations. Disability studies in the West and some universities in India, including mine, are already tackling the multiplicity of the goals of disability studies. One way in which this is being done is to mark out the differences from other fields, as the term disability studies cannot be a substitute for special education or rehab sciences. My understanding is that disability studies is compatible with community support and inclusive education. But the main concern is not think of community support and inclusive education as proxies for DS or the other way around, DS as a proxy for the other two. Though there is some movement from the religious, charitable, medical, and the social framed in cultural context, an understanding of disability as legitimate knowledge is still missing. People-oriented movements have highlighted oppressive structures and foregrounded the rights of marginalized communities. However, these voices do not include the knowledge base of disability. Both academics as well as activists work on the assumption that there are far more serious issues, such that of survival, that need attention, as if disabled people should wait their turn until the issue of poverty and employment are fully sorted out. It may be noted that all marginalized identities, such as gender or caste, suffer this problem of not being recognized in mainstream issues, but that disability is more marginal even within the marginalized. It is important to realize that the study of disability should question not only the issues of medical cure or rehab, but also conceptualize disability as a social category on par with gender, class, caste, race, and sexual orientation. Disability studies has not been privileged within academia, perhaps because understanding of disability is intimately connected to the study of ignorance. How and why various forms of knowing related to disability have not come to be, or disappeared, or have been delayed or long neglected, for better or worse, at various points in history. Absence of disability from the mainstream academia creates and maintains a status quo where the disability is incorporated within the existing social patterns as a problem. Disability thus remains an out and out state, both politically and academically. It is the source of its own oppression. Such an understanding suggests that more is at stake than a problematizing discourse of specific categories. By not exploring this relationship, higher education at large has delimited inquiry and pursuit of knowledge of disability. Possibly the reason is that schools, colleges, and universities across communities remain sites where not only knowledge, but also a middle class orientation with its patriarchal, neoliberal, and normative values are produced and reproduced. An academic understanding of disability as a social, cultural, and political phenomenon is central to counter the notion of disability as an inherent, unchallengeable trait located in the individual. Such an approach rejects the view that disability is solely a medical problem or a personal tragedy. Disability studies thus places the responsibility for re-examining and repositioning the place of disability within society, not on the individual, but on academia as well as society itself. Disability studies may be many things to many people, but if its full potential is to be realized, then it must avoid being seen as simply old wine in a new bottle, perhaps. The purpose of making disability studies an academic discipline is to create a body of knowledge which can provide orientations towards rethinking and reflecting upon aspects of our comprehension of disability and social marginalization. Disability studies exists at the uneven boundaries of the social, the concurrently rebellious and the celebratory in its insistence that disability is neither tragedy nor inspiration, but a satisfying and enjoyable way of being in the world, even if only the ableist world would not get in the way. Just like the unforeseen possibilities of a new day, reflecting on the field of disability studies is also loaded with the unknown. For instance, knowledge of disability has to be engaged in the unlearning of the traditional thinking privilege, so that disability helps us rethink the concept of marginality itself. It offers us a position to learn to one another, but it also helps one to learn to speak in such a way that renegotiates our relationships between the margin and the center. Disability studies help us rewrite the relationship between the edge and the epicenter in academia as well as activism. There are no easy answers to this never-ending questions of identity and interconnections. There is no easy way of drawing boundaries, who should be in and who should be out. No easy inventory of heterogeneity of innumerable disability communities. Both as an academician and advocate, I believe that disability studies make these questions relevant to everyone, whether they identify as disabled or not at any given time. It seems to me that identity is not an ideal insertion into political discourse. Rather, it has critical implications for how discipline of disability studies can expand and thrive within academia. As an insider, I find that ideas are wide-ranging and the most radical reimagining of possibilities. They produce few answers, but rather embrace the practice of constantly troubling the questions. They make even the radical seem quite conservative. For instance, take any theory: humanism, psychoanalysis, Marxism, critical theory, feminist theory, LGBT, queer theory. You bring disability studies in myths and pose questions such as, what are the conceptions of the normal? What is autonomy? When exactly is life not worth living? Why does rationality have to be the sole determinant of our humanity? How do we define limits of humanity? Does disability studies embody unsettling ideas that refuse to disappear? The promise of disability studies is that it can renew attention of the disembodied and embodied beings that very often utilize their bodies as a means of organizing insights regarding the circumstances surrounding them. One undercurrent that the potential of enriching lives of persons with disabilities is assistive technology. I would call it AT if it's okay. Connect with people and provide a means of access to education, commerce, employment, and entertainment. Assistive technology in the global north functions on the principle that independence and access is equal to the mainstream society is the desired end goal of people with disability. Communication technologies and new media promise to revolutionize our lives by breaking down barriers. This is by Gauguin, quote, and expanding access for disabled people. To me, technology is often branded as redeeming and presumably allowing each person to overcome the social, educational, and physical barriers. Like a perfect understanding, technology assures us, read person with disability, to unshackle us from the confines of embodiment and provide us with a revolutionary antidote for impairment. The fantasy is that disability would simply fade away or become a largely insignificant difference. A powerful implication reflected in these is that assistive technology is in particular complement the playing field. However, I believe the relationship between technology and access is contradictory. Let me underscore the fact that technology can also isolate people, creating unique forms of social exclusion. A case of education in COVID is an example. A farmer sells a cow to buy a smartphone to get his son educated. These exclusions are more powerful for persons with disabilities as the discursive practices around assistive technology in school and college settings where technology is matched to student impairments is problematic. Segregation, however, can be subtler. Technology, for instance, privileges particular ways of being which are grounded in the normative, social, cultural, and economic practices, further in design, manufacture, marketing, and implementation of technology. In other words, technology is designed in ways that reflect taken for granted ideas about what constitutes normal. This assertion is being questioned by scholars in the global south as the context is critically divergent, as persons with disability primarily rely on their familial and community ties for their everyday life and not as government programs or public resources, even if legally mandated. These ideas about how we should operate are embedded within technology and are reflective of an ability expectation worldview, one that would view For example, a cochlear implant as a desirable and necessary technological advancement over deafness, which would be perceived from this vantage point as pathological and disabling, rather than as a linguistic minority identity reflective of a deaf culture. Technology is very much a part of larger social context. Such normative assumptions about how bodies are supposed to operate are deeply entrenched in all aspects of technology. Moreover, these ideologies of ability and normalcy are imbricated in our thinking and practices that we often fail to notice their patterns, authorities, contradictions, and influence. One of the fellow disabled, Tobin Cybers, who's no more. Thus, the global South will have to rethink of the design of assistive technology solutions for these from the bottom up, taking up the social context and the existing networks of support around persons with disabilities. For us, affordability is important, but we have to think about the identity issues as well. In Global South, a compulsion for technological answers to inaccessibility may represent a shift from the responsibility of society to remove barriers to full participation in society, to require individuals with and to submit a technological fix. In a way, assistive technology could be thought of as promoting a form of what McRurer calls compulsory able-bodiedness, where individuals are coerced to rely on technology to comply with the able-bodied norms rather than challenging the boundaries of what is considered as normal. This kind of thinking also is important, that there is technology that is designed for disabled people and technology designed for presumed non-disabled people, and more notably that the latter need not be accessible because of the former. My suggestion is that design of new technology for people with disabilities should neither be driven incrementally simply by the incorporation of accessibility features into mainstream technology, nor through a function-driven approach that ignores the experience of technological use. I come across inaccessible websites, media, and electronic forums. Technology can also result in unexpected and often understated forms of exclusion. The fact that technology can isolate people happens when a student is encouraged or required to take an online course rather than a course on campus, that students risk being further isolated from social opportunities available to students who take courses in campus. Isolation can be apparent in ways that accessibility is approached as a retrofit or add-on to accessibility rather than being a meaningful working of the infrastructure. The implication is that costly accessible options are always one step behind whatever technology is being nurtured for mainstream market. I often think of pirated JAWS software being used as software is very expensive. Devices designed to pose solution to problems falling into what Hendren calls narrow functioning traps that serve to empower users through what their technology can enable them to accomplish. From a disability studies standpoint, I argue how the varied ways people engage with their devices are ignored when certain technologies are coded to allow disabled people to participate in society. For instance, specific devices using associated with disability can lead to feelings of stigmatization by the users, for example, the hearing aids. Thus, assistive technology tends to associate with the medicalized technological design that could have been more socially minded and inclusive, as all technology assists everybody in some fashion or the other. Walbrink, a fellow disabled, and his colleagues give a concrete example. Brain-machine interfaces, BMI, or brain-computer interfaces, BCI, is seen as useful for many disabled people, including many having ASD, visual impairment, or hearing impairments. However, the academic literature overwhelming covers disabled people as a user within a medical framework, Thus, the bias evident in the imagery of disabled people is particularly revealing in the BMI and BCI example, because both are also created for the non-disabled users also. Yet, technologies developed to maintain the status quo of normative efficiency are not usually attentive to alternative experiences outside of full mastery. I would underscore the fact that purchase costs not only include the price of devices such as hi-fi motorized wheelchairs, but also costs for services and training needs associated with the technology, an aspect often disregarded. Close to home, disabled people have been highly critical of prenatal screening and selective abortion, seeing them as a new strategy of eugenics. New reproductive techniques reinforce the notion that there is an ideal that humanity must aspire for. Such a position looks at disability as deficient. However, this approach is like a slippery slope to other forms of selection, and thus eventually to a world of new designer baby eugenics. In this view, disability offers a way of resisting homogenization. What is required is political work which can reflect on the social values and structural inequities that promote choices. I have come across Joyjeet Pal and Manohar Swaminathan's recent work on a new technology for assistive technology. The latter started working on technologies for people with vision impairments about 4 years ago, moving to the area with the background in virtual and augmented reality technologies. And predictably, the early projects were focused on the disabled in the global north. For example, the indoor navigation for persons with visual impairments was evident. Another ongoing project is to make mainstream video games accessible to persons with visual impairment using immersive spatial audio. But bringing Joyjeet's background on disability studies, they evolved a new approach known as the ludic design for accessibility. They proposed the notion of ludic design as a framework to rethink accessibility, specifically building on past work on play and enjoyment in the process of interaction with the world around oneself. The key premise is that play and playfulness are central to what makes us human, and that by separating playfulness and exploration from the design experience, we fail the intended end users of our products. They have been appearing the ludic design methodology to introduce digital skills and computational thinking for children who are visually impaired. Early results of the work are reported in the research plan. These projects involve a diverse set of researchers, including 2 that are blind, working with children, and many teachers who are also visually impaired. One of the early insights from their work for me is that play and playfulness appear to actually thrive when faced with factors which are normally viewed as deficiencies and challenges in the global south. Finally, I want to mention Rosie Braidotti's book, The Posthuman, that inspired scholars to argue for a post-human disability studies. Goodlay, again a close friend, have argued, and a very well-known disability scholar, have argued that disability studies is perfectly at ease with the post-human in criticizing the ideal of the humanity that was implicitly assumed to be masculine, white, urbanized, speaking a standard language, heterosexually inscribed in a reproductive unit, and a full citizen of a recognized polity. I do appreciate Braidotti's aim not only to destabilize humanist men and women, but also to look for options in response to the oppressive nature of humanism and to rethink our relationships with our environments, our world, human and non-human inhabitants of our planet. Using Rosie Braidotti's understanding, I will underscore three aspects that are critical to disabled lives. First is life beyond the self. Second is life beyond the species. And finally, life beyond death. For Braidotti, matter is not dialectically opposed to culture, nor to technological meditation, but continues with them. So contemporary science and biotechnologies affect the very fiber and structure of the living and have altered dramatically our understanding of what counts the basic frame of reference for human today. Braidotti suggests that thinking is about the invention of new concepts and new productive ethical relations. In this respect, theory is a form of methodical separation from dominant values. Disability, therefore, encapsulates the creative possibilities of the post-human condition. Thus, a political and critical edge is brought to the post-humanist theory. While disabled people will continue to fight to be recognized as humans in the humanist sense and register of humanism, but equally and simultaneously are already enacting form of activism, art, and rationality that pushes everyone to think imaginatively and critically about a new epoch that we might term the post-human. Disability disavows the human, it desires and rejects it, and in this dynamic necessarily contradictory play with the human. Disability allows thinking again about technological relationships and politics. Thus, technological mediation cannot be given up. The question is not, should we be enhanced by technology? The question should not be something along with the lines of what ontological, ethical, and political questions are raised by our technological enhancement. When we think of enhancement, we are pushed into the worlds of cyborgs. In one sense, we are everyday's robots by our smartphones, apps, and our insistent use of social media, reviving our bodies and ourselves. On the other side, we have problematic aspects of human enhancement. As Waldring reminds us, just as we should have the choice to get rid of disability, we should also have the right to choose not to be fixed and choose to live with bodies that are not, quote unquote, normal. The right not to be coerced by the society to adopt a normal body is also a central demand of transhumanism. As a woman from Global South, I do share Waldring's concerns about a movement that appears to wish away disability. In other words, assistive technology, for me, is more than a split between the haves and the have-nots. I'm more than aware of the technological hierarchies that are troubling, vicious, discordant, and immobilizing. Simply removing add-on categories to the growing techno worlds will not capture the deeper meaning of excess that can enrich the quality of disabled lives. To conclude, I'm very fond of bell hooks, who reminds us that achievement of colonialism does not require the assumption of power in someone else's country. Rather, colonialism can be accomplished by dominant and normative hegemonies through social and political apartheid. The understanding of ignorance should remind us that apartheid is always subject to constant revision. Perhaps the greatest challenge is to comprehend that we have consciously or unconsciously oppressed the academia by choosing to stay with a singular discipline. It is only when we create intersections that we attack gaps which place limits on human beings, both disabled and non-disabled. Unless we can confront the failure of the privileged and the powerful groups, an accessible academic world will not be possible. We need to find answers to more fundamental questions such as the meaning of humanity, at the same time safeguarding against cynicism. While hope might be an accomplished liar, I believe that hope is all that we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ghai.
Very exciting. We will open the audience for questions. There is one I see already. The earlier ones I have lost on my chat. So Amit, you may have to help if there are questions before Radha. Is there a question before the audience person Radha?
No, that's...
No, those
No,
are only
okay.
instructions. I
Okay,
read
so yeah, you read that, right? Please go ahead.
Yeah.
So I'll just read the question. What type of identity issues? Also, isn't isolation caused by technology a social issue for both those with disabilities and those without? Thank you, Radha.
Yes.
Please, Anita.
Yeah. Thank you, Radha. The identity issues, when I said I was talking about, obviously with context of disability, that how disabled people, how their identities are evolved, because many at times, they are not even considered as, like, for example, citizens of this country. I mean, in the sense that I think about 3 years back, I couldn't vote, and where I kind of said, so someone said that your brother can go and vote, so my identity and my education and everything was, kind of, and I of course sat there as and put in a protest. So I think identity for people with disabilities, therefore, is very, very critical and important. The question about the isolation that is caused by technology, yeah, I agree that it is there for both disabled as well as non-disabled. But I think there is a difference, a very subtle difference between the two. Because, if you want to go, if a non-disabled person wants to go out for a walk, it's possible, no? I mean, you don't have to think about it. But if a person who is disabled and who wants to go for a walk, has to think, 20 times, whether I can or whether I can't. I mean, I am in Delhi, a capital city, when I take out my wheelchair, to buy something, my family always says that, you're going to die, because the way traffic is, you're not going to reach out there. But technology in that particular sense does support us. I mean, it would not, like I said, I'm a cyborg in the beginning itself, I should also say that I have a mitral valve with which I have to take life-saving medicines. But that mitral valve is metallic. So that again is technology, I mean, I cannot be, I survive because of that. But that does not really mean that I can go to a friend's house whose house is on the 3rd floor, and I want to go and spend some time with her. I cannot do that, because that is, I mean, it's not as if she will not, or friends will not invite you. But the fact that, there is always a structure that goes against you. The infrastructure is so problematic that you can't quite reach there. So I think it is important for us to, I can say that I'm very ambivalent with technology in one particular say, because I can neither stay without it, nor I can, understand fully that if one of these days they would completely normalize us in every possible way, then will there be, changes which would be there or not? And like what Walbring said, and what I, can share, that sometimes, you are asked that whether the stem cell research would actually make me walk. And my answer is that I'm not interested, because, I have no memory of a life which is without disability. I only have a life with disability, all my memories, everything, because I was 2 years old when I had polio. So I don't think that I can, ever would want to be, that's my choice. I would want to be able to, but yes, I do want, the infrastructure in which even if I go for a walk on my wheelchair, at least I should be allowed to do that. I think that is something which is very, very important for me. Increase our agency, and on the other hand, we have eugenic technological developments that aim to eliminate disability
Please go ahead.
and disable people altogether. You highlighted this paradox wonderfully. Could you also talk about your thinking? You think academia and activism can take to deal with this paradox? What could be some responses in research and activism? I think within academia, of course, the most important thing is, first of all, to kind of, locate disability, I mean, whether we are, looking at disability and technology together is a question that we all have to ask ourselves. But of course, technology is important and it will be there. But I feel that, I did say about the slippery slope, and that is that, it's important that technology is helpful. It's in academia also, supposedly if I have students who are, I mean, mobility impaired or are deaf. I mean, I have to first figure out whether my structure is, disabled friendly, that they can actually come to the classes, so that's very, very important, and in my university, which is a very old university, so the structures are very, very difficult ones, and sometimes I cannot even go for a particular seminar because, there are 12 steps out there and I can't go down. So in one particular sense, in one particular sense, I think academia and activism has to be, taken together, because, we have to realize that at what level, people do say the question of choice, but I'm not sure whether choice is always there, because there are times when I, fly, and sometimes, of course, I'm flying alone. The first question that comes to me, and I can carry my bag and I reach there. The first question is, are you going alone? Now, when somebody says that, are you going alone? I always have 2-3 ways. I mean, one is of rage, that, okay, I mean, why should you be asking me this question? No, I mean, I bought the ticket and whatever. Another is a kind of a humorous answer, where I kind of say, will you come with me? So then she will say, how can I come? I said, yeah, you can't now. So then don't ask the question whether I have to go alone. Now, so when we think of academia, I can say that I am so lonely at times in the university, because, whenever, there are seminars or there is kind of a discussion, you actually are, I mean, they would not really come to seminars that are on disability per se, disability studies per se. So in that particular sense, how academia in itself is actually thinking about, which is why I said that the ignorance, I mean, they would just simply say that, okay, so you are there. Thankfully, I did not come with a reserved post. People who come with a reserved post find it even more difficult. I mean, I have a colleague who has many problems and who will tell me that, Anita ma'am, I can't go and say this to, the university, because they will say that you always want more. You always want more, we have done whatever we have done. So whether it is technology or whether it is intentionality, I think both are linked with each other, So technology also, like, for example, the software, whether we have the software for everybody or not, So in that particular sense, we really have to think about how, you can think about the relationship between academia and activism. And the other problem is the activists really do not want knowledge about disability. They only want to fight about the rights of the disabled, that is about, the reservation, about employment, about, recreation and all. But they are not willing to actually intersect academia and activism, which is there. My colleague, I was just talking to him before I came for the discussion, where he was trying to say that, we always have to think about the revolutionary ways in which we can think about, because activism and academia, the intersections always are also ambivalent, So we are not very clear, as if there is a very friendly relationship that is there between the activist also and the, academics also. And for me, it's even more difficult because I'm both, I'm interested in, activism also, and I'm also interested in, knowledge construction also. And knowledge construction in that sense is very useful. But I think more often than not, they would only be fighting for whatever has not happened, and that is something very, very significant. Is there another question?
There are a few questions.
Activists don't have any knowledge regarding the actual feeling of the disabled people. No, they do. I won't say that they don't know. But I think it is important also to write. It's also important to, intersect with academia. That, you, for example, point of view where, many of these, young girls who have written about sexuality, either in terms of blogs or in terms of, their stories. So in one particular sense, it is a very, very important resource because, you can then understand their personal and you can also understand the political, in both ways. And that becomes a part of the academia in that particular sense. So then there is a question, how disability studies could help parents having daughter with ID that already has internalized ableism, as in they do not see her as a full human being. Yes, this is a very, very serious kind of a question that is there, because more often than not, I think the parents always are too protective. And also, I think in patriarchy, I mean, the girl is, I just want to kind of give one example of what could happen is, like, for example, some of them would call you and say that we've got a hysterectomy done for the girls, and when I kind of say that why, I mean, she's a human being. So they say that, well, she can be abused and she can be pregnant. So then I would have to look after her also. And if she gets pregnant and has a child, then I have to look after her also. Now you can understand the mother also. I mean, for me, the mother is also important and the daughter is also important. But in a way, they are saying that they are legitimizing abuse even in the family, where they are saying that abuse would happen and, but we cannot do anything about it. All we can do is that we cannot, kind of, we can get the hysterectomy done so that she doesn't get pregnant. So when we say that we are curbing, I mean, there is that story about Ashley, and they had kind of, had so many surgeries that she remained what is called as the pillow angel, So in that particular sense, I think how to change and wherein to bring the, sensitivity that, but I have to understand also the material reality as to how are they placed in their setup, whether they need support. And if the support is not there, then I think they tend to kind of, control and curb, the child, because there is no other option for them in one sense. And yet, I think we that is where the political work is needed, that, where we can create, support systems so that, they can, a solidarity can emerge in whether the neighborhood is there or the community which is there, so that they can kind of, look after whosoever, people with disabilities are. And Samir also said the internalized oppression. Now, this internalized oppression is more a sense of, from a very, very analytical sense, and also a disability scholar. I would say that right from the minute when you're born, if there is and if the parents have not been very supportive, now how do you live? You live with this kind of a burden that is there. It is better to be dead than alive kind of a thesis. So the idea that oppression is within the internal psyche, that cannot be removed so fast, that they can actually change and be like, in one sense, fight it out and resist against whatever the oppression is there. So I think that is where we need to find ways. And of course, there's no magic. I cannot say that I have all the solutions which I can give. The only solution that I think is that the community has to be alive to all the human beings who are, in their understanding, are quote unquote not normal in that sense. Yeah. Does North and South also differing the way in which curbing the growth of? Yes, of course. I gave the Ashley example from America. So it's not as if it is only happening in South. In fact, South, I would say, global South, people would be more protective of their children rather than the North. I would, at least that's because institutionalization is possible out there where, and it's possible out here also, but the institutions they still have that cultural understanding of not giving up on kids, and the society's gaze, is always there. What are you doing? Kind of that. So I think definitely it's there, and the infants are definitely, they do that. Okay. So what kinds of initiatives have taken in NEP 2020 regarding people with disabilities? We know that all stakeholders play an important role in their upliftment. So what kinds of initiatives has talk about identity and address issues of people with disability? I'm not sure whether they have done enough. As far as I'm concerned, right now, I have not read it fully, but as far as I'm concerned, the policy which is there, they're sandwiched between the I'm forgetting the social empowerment, the human. I'm just forgetting the name of the ministry. And between the two, I think they talk about inclusive education, and they talk about the special education. And education is always benefited in that sense, because in all the premier institutions where teaching the BLEd or LLEd, whatever is disability always is an optional course. They never try to train all the teachers of teaching disabled children as well. So they always think that to teach disabled children is something very, very difficult and different, and to teach the quote-unquote normal children is not difficult at all. So as far as whatever I know about NEP, I don't think they have really thought about disability in that particular sense, where they would address their identity issues and the sensitivity about, how they can be considered as full functioning persons. Okay. What do you think could be a way to emphatically see inclusion in Indian and global South education paradigms after 25 years of Disability Act in existence. I think most of you would know the data. First of all, we don't have, it's all disaggregated data all the time. But whatever data we have, I think 25% of the children and 25% actually get educated. So you can imagine where we have reached, after 25 years of the act. Now, in the, what is happening, like, I mean, in DU till I was there, and in AUD now in the 5 years that I've been there, we give fee waivers. We also try to kind of have them on the ground floor and classes and all. But we barely actually get the, whatever the number of seats that we have, we can fulfill that. We never did. And there are students who are, 5 or 6 are there. In DU, when I was there, and in the news that I kind of read, there are always almost about, I think, 1,100 seats. And out of the 1,100 seats, about 500, 600 can students do come. So the question that arises is why? Now, the answer is that, the reservation can be only done at the college university level. At the school level, you have RTE, and you have the 25% or whatever, in which disabled as well as the other marginalized constituencies are included. So if you don't pass the class 12th exam, then even if you have a complete reservation at the college level, what good it will do for us? So in that particular sense also, I mean, we've done some research work at the village level in Chhattisgarh and near Ranchi and Hazaribagh. And one realizes that most of the disabled children, both girls and boys, have done class 5. And after that, the middle school and the high school is about 8 kilometers away from the village, So the sense is that they cannot go after that. And in that particular sense, obviously, then they remain in the village. And I think that that's there even in metropolitan city. So many problems where, how to bring the children into the school and then, of course, go to the college. So higher education has reservation, but schooling, I'm not sure whether how much of, empathy and sensitivity is there in the teachers to be able to teach. Okay. So good evening.
Dr. Ghai, there were a couple of questions earlier, and this is on Global North and Global South. I'll just rephrase it for you. Supriya was asking, what in your perspective is the most glaring difference between treatment of disability in academia in the Global North and the Global South? And a similar question is, in regards to the Global South, this is from Jennifer, what is the conversation with respect to technology and generally around disability that we should be having, keeping in mind our positioning as the Global South? So,
can I take it one by one?
Yes, sure, yeah.
Yeah. The difference between the Global South and Global North, I mean, I've kind of, traveled, in one sense widely, and have been like, in most of the, universities where I kind of, go from the perspective of disability studies programs. But I find that, their, inclusion into the classrooms and all is better than what would be there in Global South. I think that's a simple thing. I mean, it's not even, one would not even be surprised to say that. I mean, that it's there. But I mean, they have, like, even if you look at, any of their whatever, disability, reasonable accommodation, and all that, they all do provide that, in that particular sense. But when I speak to the disability scholars, I mean, Scott Danforth, Susan Gable, these are people who actually work on education. They themselves also say that the problems that are there, maybe percentage might be different, but the fact that there are problems are there in both global north as well as global south. But the only thing is that they are little better than ours, little no more better than, in sense that they can be at least included in the campus and all that, and there are no hassles in that particular sense. And also I feel that the kind of funding that is there for students with disabilities, I think it's better as compared to what we do it in India. I think that is there. I mean, India, I would say, even like, for example, I've been to Bangladesh and I've been to Nepal. I mean, been to these kind of global south, if we kind of talk about, I think there is not much difference on the education. But yes, it depends upon whether the cities, the students have been kind of educated, are more resourceful. But I think in the rural areas and also the towns, I mean, the smaller towns, I think the difficulties are still there everywhere in that particular sense. And also global north has some kind of a social security which would be kind of given to people for unemployment also. Like I one of my cousins who's there in New York, and at the time of COVID, so was given enough money for her to sustain herself in the in her hostel, when she was there, and she's uses the wheelchair. So in that particular sense, I mean, there are examples where they are better off in that sense, but I'm not sure whether there is too much of, I mean, you can't say that all of them are educated. I mean, I don't think so, but I might be wrong.
So the second question was on what the role of academia, or what is it that academia should be doing, and I think that also fits into what.
Yeah, so that global north is much better. I mean, if you look at whether it's UK or whether it's USA or whether it's Australia, I mean, most of them have disability studies programs. So in that particular sense, there's a greater inclusion of programs which are on disability, and in that particular sense I think they are much better, like Sheffield and all, where I have visited, I mean, in that sense. So, but it's not as if only disabled students are there. There could be non-disabled students also out there, but that is where they are doing the disability studies programs, and that is where, and there are intersections, because they have also disability and education, disability and design, disability and English, I mean, literature, so like that they have brought in disability into, many of these universities, and the programs are there. So that, I think, enhancement, of course, definitely is there.
So there's a question from Mukta Mrinal. Would you like to take that?
Yeah, chapter on how Anita's book has a whole chapter on how mythologies shape a lot of negative perceptions of disability in India. Yeah, I mean, you've written a chapter there. If you read a chapter, then there is, yes, there are. I mean, I've looked at mythology from the perspective of, let's say, Ramayana and Mahabharata. And I've also gone into Rig Vedas and all, and I've tried to see how disability, you look at the characters in Ramayana. Manthara, is the dwarf, So the negativity comes from that particular point of view. You think about Shakuni, who had a limp. Though if you actually, or Gandhari, who had, she was blind. Now, from a feminist perspective, I would say that, my God, I mean, another person that the husband, of course, can be, assisted, but she had that, bandage over the eyes, so that she also, of course, the love is there, but that love is not, in that particular sense understood. So there's a lot of negativity which is there because the evil and the sinister kind of a parts which are there. And I also think about like Shurupnakha, I'll just give that example, which is important from the sexuality point of view, where, all that, Shurupnakha said was that she was attracted to Ram and Lakshman, both. So Ram said, I'm married, you go and look at Lakshman. And Lakshman, see, these are all mythologies. So I'm not like kind of trying to only take it from mythology. Okay. And she, cuts the nose, right? Now, to me, my understanding was that there is a complete desexualization of the woman. The fact that, you're only attracted to, him. So you could have said no, otherwise also no. But there is also a way in which a desexualization part comes up, because there is amputation in one particular sense is metaphorically out there, in that sense. Or even if you remember Eklavya, Eklavya, and I still, because for me, the education part is very important, where, when he says that I want that Guru Dakshina, and the thumb, which is needed for the archery. I mean, that is taken off. I mean, sometimes I kind of think about the teacher-student bond and how you can kind of, disable a student who actually studied without you also, only saw you, and I mean, like in that particular sense. So all these, I think, for me, do bring in a lot of negativity in that particular sense. I mean, I took my students to I had to take them to mental hospital and just a holiday to Jaipur. And I was, about to go to the restaurant, and my girls had already gone in. So this 6-year-old beggar who came to me and who said, "Ki Luli madam, tu to kuch de de." Now, I was taken aback. So I just stood there and I said, I was sitting there and I said, "अच्छा, मैं तुझे खाना खिलाऊंगी, पर तू मुझे बता कि तूने पहले लूली क्यों बोला मेरे को?" तो she said कि अरे सभी कहते हैं. तो मैंने कहा सब मतलब कौन, बताओ ना, सबका कुछ नाम पता होना चाहिए. तो कहने लगी कि नहीं, चाल में हमारे लोग, टीवी में आता है, सब जगह बोलते हैं. मैंने कहा पर मैं तो लूली हो ही नहीं. तो कहती है तो फिर तुम क्या हो, तुम हो तो मैंने कहा नहीं, मैं तो लंगड़ी हूँ. तो कहने लगी अच्छा, फर्क होता है इसमें. मैंने कहा हाँ, बिल्कुल फर्क होता है, मैं तो सिर्फ चल नहीं सकती. Then it is very important for me, Luli madam. So look at the power issue. The power was there and I had the purse. So power was there with me and she didn't have the power. So the madam part came up. And tu to de de. No, so then I said कि tu to का क्या मतलब है? तो she said कि नहीं, मतलब तुझे तो तरस आ जाएगा ना, क्योंकि तेरे पे भी तो लोग तरस खाते होंगे ना. तो मैंने कहा कि मेरे पे तो नहीं खाते हैं, लेकिन मैं तेरे को खाना खिलाऊंगी. तो कहते नहीं, पैसे देगी तो तब, नहीं तो मैं जा रही हूँ. तो मैंने कहा अच्छा, मैं पैसे भी दूंगी, पर तू मेरे साथ बैठ. So while I was doing this, I took a stool for her because I was only on the, I have my, I carry my chair, always, as I joke around. So then this man who took the stool, and I went and returned that stool, and he said ki nahi ma'am. So I said thank you ma'am for the stool. So he said ki nahi ma'am, aaj hamara punya ho gaya. Mane to, I just took a stool from and him, and that was kind of a good deed of the day for him. So you can imagine that what kind of imagery is there, whether it is on the, and you look at the Bollywood also, the how they describe, some are good, some are bad, but of course there is always an imagery which is very striking, in that sense, both mythology as well as, and some part of the mythology comes into the Bollywood also, in that sense. Okay, Now, rather debatable thought, but wanted to ask your opinion on this. Does defining disability studies and independent academia thought create a special education kind of identity of disability? No, we didn't do this. I am part of the School of Human Studies. We have gender, we have developmental practice, we have psychology, and disability studies is a part of it. So we look at human predicament as a part of the school. So in one particular sense, it's an interdisciplinary work that we actually try to do. So in that particular sense, it should not be a special education kind of a thing that we have thought about. At least that's not within my own understanding, and we've not done that. But because, programs like, for example, disability studies program is there, it is there within the, School of Human Studies. So kind of identity of disability linked academic work, and should we rather not be looking at including disabilities within all fields of academia? Definitely, there are so many people. I mean, my colleague is actually in School of Letters. There is another friend who is in history. There are so many different people in different disciplines. So it's not true that, only disability studies, except that I am interested in kind of, knowledge construction of disability and not look at it as only a kind of a concessional category, which is understood. So that's something which is a idiosyncratic, you could say, understanding of that. But I think it is there in different disciplines where, but it needn't be that a person who is in SOL actually is talking about disability. Then it will be literature out there, But life writing, for example, is there for him, and he would kind of take in some of the narratives of the disabled into the School of Letters, which is for there.
I just wanted to thank you for the wonderful lecture and the passionate interactions. And I'm very delighted to have you here, Anita. Thanks so much on all our behalf, all the participants' behalf, or the IIIT's behalf, and the center's behalf. You really, really kickstarted this webinar series. And I would say maybe one or two more questions, and then we can close if it is okay.
Okay, there's a question out here. Positive stories regarding people. Of course, there are so many. I think there's something called Point of View, and they have a book called Skin Stories. You can just Google it, and all the stories are there. I think many of them, look, that way you would say that human predicament for anyone, disabled or non-disabled, it's not as if we all have we are happy and they are unhappy. It's not like that. It is just that, you have to look at it together. In that sense. So there are many positive stories. I think I am also a positive story. I have had a love affair with the doctors. I have had polio. I've had 2 open heart surgeries, and I have survived breast cancer as well. And yet you can see me, I'm working full time. So I am not sure if positive stories are not there. All the time there are positive, more than me. There are positive stories all the time. So,
okay, the last question. I think that will be a last question to sign off. Actually, very appropriate question from Dr. Kapil. What do you think if a person is woman and also disabled? Which of the identities would be dominating? The last question, and thank you so much.
In patriarchy, I think a woman is always, somewhere will have to resist the oppression. I'm not going to say will suffer, because I don't suffer anyway. I think, and I don't think women suffer in that sense, because we do have to find out the ways to resist whatever is this. And transformation, I think, has to be there, which I think is always.
Thank you so much. I wish that's the only time I wish people were present so that you could hear our hearty appreciation with an applause, but I will do it on everybody's behalf. Count it multiplied by 100. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for attending and for your very, very interesting questions. We all hope to see you in the series of lectures that are going to follow. Over to you, Amit, if you have any statements to make.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Manohar, for anchoring this. And thank you, Dr. Ghai, for one hour of continuous talking. I know this is very difficult after full lecture session. And
No, I have a two classes are there, 2 hours. It's okay. I'm used to.
after 2 hours, 1 more hour is you need maybe a cup of
No, I took 1.5 today.
coffee. Thank you very much for kickstarting this series. Very interesting, very energetic, very apt in the context. Thank you everyone for joining us, for staying back. And we hope this is a platform that has been created to engage in such conversations. We hope to continue our conversations further.
Yeah, sure.
We'll keep you posted on the next session. Thank you very much.
So much.
Thank you, everybody.